Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello, this is Leah Aharoni, and welcome to News from the Torah. Today is the 7th of March, the 23rd day of the Hebrew month of Adar, 2021, and this week we will read two Torah portions, Ve'ekel Pekudei, and with them finish the book of Shmot, the book of Exodus. For the past 4 weeks, we have been reading about the construction of the Mishkan, the Tabernacle. And this week, the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, will finally be built and stand up. The Mishkan was built by the Jews as a commandment from God to atone for the sin of the golden calf. It is a perfect dwelling place for God in this world, a place where the Jewish people and God can come together in communion. The Mishkan was made from every element on earth. It had gold and silver and copper. It had the inanimate and the plants and the animals and human beings come together to serve as a microcosm for God's presence in the world. It had the perfect harmony of every color and every metal and every stone, a perfect harmony that is just like the world, carries the name of God in it. And this is so different from the sin of the golden calf. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov writes that the real sin of the golden calf is when one character trait, one approach says, I'm the only right one. You have to listen only to me. Everything else is irrelevant. Go only after me and you will be okay. It's the gold that lures us with its glitter away from everything else. In this week on the show, we will talk about the golden calf in our lives, all the different glitters, all the different false promises that are pulling us away from the harmony of multifaceted opinions and a whole beautiful world that is supposed to proclaim God's name. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back after these messages.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom! I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back. So cancel culture is all around us. This week, Dr. Seuss, of all people, was banned as, quote-unquote, a racist because he promoted a colorblind outlook on the world. His books that really have characters of every single color, of every single type and shape, that really, really promote a beautiful and fair outlook, have been showcased as examples of racism. And if you go on social media and see people putting out their opinions, more and more of these posts have a disclaimer. If you don't agree with me, don't comment. It's as if we've lost the ability to hold a conversation, to hear a different opinion. People are disinviting opinions that disagree with them because their identities are so fragile. They just cannot handle conflict. And as I'm seeing this, I'm really hurting because we're losing the ability to have a conversation. And when we tell each other to keep going and not commenting, we're losing our freedoms. We're losing the freedom of thought and speech. We're losing the freedom to be free of brainwashing, manipulation, and coercion. We're losing the freedom to ask questions. We're losing the freedom to share and receive full, honest information. We're losing the freedom to make individual, educated choices. And we're losing the freedom to listen and hold honest debate about ideas. Thanks to social media and its algorithm, we're living more and more in bubbles, living in groupthink, where divergent groups of people have all the confirmation for their own biases, their own outlooks, and they're less and less able to hear and process and understand other outlooks. And this is how freedom dies. Because freedom and truth live in the light of free expression, of question asking, and factual information. Freedom and truth only happen when debate is alive and encouraged, even when it makes us feel uncomfortable. Freedom and truth live when, despite having different opinions, people respect each other tremendously. And how ironic that all of it is happening during a pandemic, during pestilence, when we cannot even hear each other's opinions on medical facts. Last week, we also read in the Torah about how the Jewish people hold the census. The census are held through every person giving half a coin, and when all the coins are counted, we know how many people there are. This is how the census were held in the Torah. This is done so because God explicitly forbids counting Jews and individuals. If you've ever been in a synagogue where somebody's trying to figure out if there's a minyan, if there are enough people to hold official services, you will notice that they do not count people, but they will use a verse with 10 words in it to see if there are 10 people present. Because the punishment for counting people as individuals is a pandemic, a pestilence. And why is that? Rabbi Natan of Breslov writes, as I noted earlier, that God's name is glorified only when the Jewish people are united, specifically bringing their different aspects together. It is this multifaceted unity that is the source of our life and health and the best protection against illness. But on the other hand, when every single person sees themselves as an individual, as separate, this is how we cut ourselves off from the source of our life and health. And then pandemics become the norm. And it is so interesting that specifically in this pandemic, we have been told to isolate. We've taken our social isolation, our individuality, which we have been upholding for the past generation, and now forced to take it to the extreme to see how well we like it. And we're social distancing, taking to the extreme what we have been doing in general to see how well we like it. And all of us are finally understanding that we cannot live as individuals. We cannot live socially distanced. We need a community to hold us together, to bring us together. And it is this unity that is the source of life and well-being for the Jewish people, but really for everybody. It is this multifaceted harmony and beauty that I mentioned earlier that is the experience of the Mishkan, of the Tabernacle that the Jewish people are building in the desert. And this Mishkan was an atonement for the sin of the golden calf. So why was golden calf so dire? Well, first of all, obviously it's idolatry. It's putting up a graven image and presenting it as God. Hasidic sources write that the difference between holiness and the opposite of holiness is that in holiness, all the different character traits, all the different attributes of the world come together, and they all understand that they need each other to create a real 3D true picture of the world. But the opposite of holiness is when any one character, any one attribute, any one idea or approach thinks that it's my way or the highway, that only it is the right way to go. And unfortunately, Rabbi Natan of Breslov, Rabbi Nachman's premier student, writes that very often this other side of unholiness dresses up in the clothes of mercy, presenting itself as concern for greater common good. So what happens is we go out fighting for some greater good, and the righteous indignation makes us think that we have the right to shut down, hurt, block, cancel, and otherwise dismiss other people because their thoughts or their approaches are dangerous. I think this is something that all of us need to be very mindful of. It's a trap that is set up for all of us. We all need to be very mindful not to cancel other people because of their opinions, not to write people off because the discussion with them makes us uncomfortable, not to brand people as bad because we disagree. Anytime we are unable to appreciate God's multifaceted truth, that is never simple and clear-cut and always complex and nuanced. Every time we're unable to see each other, every time we dismiss each other and our mutual ideas, every one of these instances is an inability to see God, who has created a complex world that has all kinds of different ideas working together. In the creation of the world, the Torah tells us that God put together the fire and the water and brought them together in a covenant, creating shamayim, the firmaments. The word for firmaments, shamayim, means sham, esh, v'mayim, fire and water. And fire and water symbolize two different approaches to the world. Fire is all about boundaries and strictness, and water is about pleasure and mercy. And the only way the world can exist, if you bring the two together and understand the need to live in synergy. So this is a very basic Jewish approach to the world. And this is how God wanted to have a dwelling place in the world, in a Mishkan, in a tabernacle that has representation from every kind of creature, from every kind of element that represents the entire harmony of the world. And only then can God abide there. But when we build cancel cultures, when we build echo chambers that only have one kind of thought, only one kind of idea, what we're telling God is we know them better than He does, because we're not willing to see complexity, we're not willing to see nuance, and we write off millions of other people with other thought processes and approaches. If there's anything that is dangerous to our world, if there's one pestilence, one pandemic out there, it's the pandemic of the cancel culture. It is seriously much more dangerous than any virus, because this is how truth dies. And anytime you see a person who makes you feel uncomfortable, whose ideas do not jive with your ideas, and you tell them to shut up and go away, know that you have fallen for the other side. You have fallen for something that is not true. You have fallen for the golden calf. Yes, we all need to exercise this muscle of living in uncomfortable moments with people who think differently. And ironically, this ability to live with these people, to hear their ideas, to live through the discomfort of the debate, this is what opens up our mind. This is what really, really shows our commitment and our faith in our own ideas. So I urge you, the next time you have a debate, the next time you put up a post on Facebook, the next time you engage in discussion. Don't cancel other people. Don't tell them not to post comments that disagree with you. Welcome debate. Encourage debate. It's the only way for truth to come out. It's the only way to create a dwelling place for God in this world. It's the only way to sidestep the danger of the golden calf.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with Love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with Love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back. I want to talk to you about a really troubling phenomenon that I'm coming across more and more, and that is the woke erasure of women. So this week, doing some research on the COVID vaccine, I came across the site of the American College of Gynecologists. And this is what the American College of Gynecologists chose to write about the vaccine. American College of Gynecologists recommends that COVID-19 vaccines should not be withheld from pregnant individuals who meet criteria for vaccination based on ACIP recommended priority groups. Furthermore, COVID-19 vaccines should be offered to lactating individuals, similar to non-lactating individuals, when they meet criteria for receipt of the vaccine based on prioritization groups. So yes, there are no more pregnant women, and there are no more breastfeeding women. There are only pregnant individuals and lactating individuals. And earlier this week, I came across a new term, chest feeding. Yes, not breastfeeding, chest feeding. This is how UK government now calls breastfeeding, because breastfeeding or nursing is just too quote-unquote natural. And yes, it's too reminiscent of these pesky women, because we obviously do not want to hurt people who are not women, who identify as such. And I think this is a disaster, because what this does is it erases women. It's really interesting that in this week's Torah portion, the Torah talks about a very special vessel. And this vessel was a fountain made out of copper that the priests used to sanctify themselves by washing their hands and feet. And the Torah tells us that this fountain of copper was made by women giving their copper mirrors to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses. And our rabbis tell a backstory to this offering. In Egypt, the Egyptians separated men from their families and sent them out to work in the fields. And the main idea behind this move was for Jews not to procreate. If you separate men from women, then obviously they're not going to have children. So what the Jewish women would do, they would go out and catch fish and cook it and take food and drink and their copper mirrors out to the fields and feed their tired, ailing husbands. And then they would use these copper mirrors to play a game. Who's prettier? I'm prettier, you're prettier. And basically, with this foreplay, they would then go ahead and have children. In the desert, the women decided to take these copper mirrors with which they basically were able to build their families and give them as a present to God. So all of the Jewish women showed up at Moses' tent, and all of them gave Moses the mirrors, and Moses was enraged. What do you mean? You're using these mirrors that you've been using for the evil inclination? You want to give them to God? Moses literally could not wrap his head around how something that is used for vanity, a mirror, could be a fitting gift to God. And God said, Moses, you are wrong. These mirrors are the most precious gift that I can receive in the tabernacle. Please take these mirrors that are more precious to me than anything else and fashion them into this fountain for which the priests will wash their hands and feet. They will sanctify themselves, meaning that this fountain is the source of holiness and sanctification. And this idea is really central to Judaism because Judaism is all about taking the physical world and sanctifying it. It's not about building monasteries and separating from the world and living somewhere on a mountain, a holy and separate existence. That might be the idea of sanctity in other religions, but certainly not in Judaism. Judaism is all about engaging with this world and making this world a dwelling place for God. How do we do it? By using everything in this world, in this physical, material world, our food, our drink, our relationships, our work, business, and money, taking all the physical objects and making them holy. And the Jewish women had a special insight in how to do that. The Talmud tells us that every single Jewish holiday, every single time the Jewish people faced a crisis, it were the Jewish women who led the people out of it. We just had Purim, and on Purim it was Esther who had her courage to go into King Ahasuerus and beg for the Jewish people to be saved. And we're heading towards Passover. And on Passover, of course, it were these Jewish women who held the faith when their men not necessarily had that faith. The women had the faith that they want to have more children, they want to continue the nation, and then they had the faith that they would leave Egypt and they would have deliverance. And these women took into the desert tambourines so they could dance and sing. Women really have powers that men do not have. And men have powers that women are less likely to have. Every gender has an edge in one thing or the other. And blurring the lines between genders or treating all of us as individuals without a gender identity is going to create a very flat and not interesting world. For example, do you know that having a woman lead a company is the number one marker for company success? Female CEOs make better CEOs. Female CEOs create more successful companies. And not just CEOs. In research, the more women there are in the top echelons of the company, in the C-suite, the better the company will perform. And so on. Women have a different style of leadership. Women have a different style of communication that men do. Women have a different style of shopping than men do. Men and women tend to be different. And unfortunately, our society is trying to blur these lines and treat us all as this one mash of people. And I think it's just very wrong to erase women in this way. And why is it done? Because the words men and women have somehow become triggering. And our language defines how we think. There's a tiny vocal minority of transgender individuals. And anytime they hear words men or woman, they feel like they're being disrespected. Now, how many transgender individuals are there in the world? The numbers differ, but it's anywhere between 0.1% to 1%. So for 0.1% to 1% of individuals, we are going to change our entire language. For 1/10 to 1% of individuals, we're going to erase the gender identity of the other 99%. And of course, this is just the beginning. And of course, obviously, if you disagree with this manipulation of our consciousness, you're automatically branded as a transphobe in another now knee-jerk reaction of the cancel culture. And this is happening not just in the United States and not just in Europe. In the past few weeks, Minister of Defense Benny Gantz has passed a new regulation in the Israel Defense Forces. From now on, Israeli army applications, instead of asking the soldiers to name their mother and father, will now ask them to name parent 1 and parent 2. And the same kinds of moves are made in different government organizations, erasing the words father and mother and substituting parent 1 and parent 2 instead. Now, I don't know about you, but I am not ready to give up on my womanhood. And I'm not ready to give up my motherhood. I want to be called a woman, and I want to be called a mother. These are major parts of my identity. I'm proud of them. I cherish them. I carried 7 children in my body to be called a mother, and I don't be called a pregnant individual. Or a parent 1 for that matter. Being a woman gives me amazing resources that men don't have, and being a man gives men amazing edge that they have that many women don't. We're not individuals. We are a society in which every person contributes something different, something multifaceted, and erasing and blurring our contribution, our ability not to trigger less than 1% of individuals is wrong. So I urge you to notice these little manipulations of language. Because like I said, we think through our language. And there are forces out there, there are people out there who are trying to manipulate our understanding of the world by manipulating our language. And then the next generation of children is born into a world where language has been manipulated and where thinking has been manipulated. And with that thinking that is manipulated, they have a whole new outlook on the world. It's extremely dangerous and insidious. They seem to be little moves that don't really matter, but they do. They shape our culture. They shape our world. Words matter. Women matter. Women's lives matter. Men's lives matter. People's lives matter. Stop erasing women.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Ben-Tekoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany's but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
So now that Purim is over, most of the Jewish world is going into Passover. Passover is a holiday that lasts only 1 week, but in our consciousness, it takes a huge space because during the month before Passover, basically from Purim and on, the whole Jewish world is going into what's called Pesach cleaning or Passover cleaning, What this looks like is that in Jewish household, the entire household is turned over and people go through everything they have. It's spring cleaning on steroids, together with a biblical prohibition of having any kind of leavened bread in the house. So people go through the entire house, shaking it all out, cleaning it all out, making sure they don't have any breadcrumbs stuck between the books or in the kids' toys. And basically it's an excuse to clean out the whole house. It's a lot of work, and then there is a lot of shopping because you have to clean out all the food you have from year round and buy every single food item in the house kosher for Passover. And then you have to use special utensils to actually cook kosher for Passover. So it's really like turning your whole house around, turning your whole kitchen upside down. And it creates a lot of overwhelm for many Jews. And many people really dread Passover. But I want to talk about it in a different way. In a Hasidic thought class that I was teaching the other day, we mentioned the Passover Rebbe discussing how every emotion we have, and no matter what happened to awaken that emotion, is a little voice of our soul trying to get through to us. So imagine that you have a fight, or imagine that something happened and it got you angry, or it got you upset, or on the flip side, you had something very pleasant and something good happen that made you very happy. Whatever happens in the world that gives you an emotion is really your soul talking to you and getting you to notice it. Because otherwise we'll live our life on autopilot, not seeing anything, not remembering anything, just going through our life automatically, no emotion. So every time we have an emotion, it's a little call from our soul. So the Passover Rebbe suggests that every time we have an emotion, we'll leverage this moment for a heart-to-heart conversation with God. Instead of just having the emotion and being angry or being upset or being happy, what he suggests is taking the time to pull out of the situation that is giving you that emotion, and then to discuss it with God. God, why is this happening to me? This and this thing happened. This is how I feel about it. This is what I think about it. And the more you have a conversation with God, the more you create a relationship. And the situation stops being about the situation, and it starts being about your relationship with God. And he says in this book that the more you do it, the more of this heart-to-heart conversations you have with God, the more you'll be mindful of your emotional moments, and the easier it will be for you to pull out and to have a relationship with God. And as I was giving this class, I remembered an analogy I once heard from a parenting expert. Each one of us has an emotional, quote-unquote, bank account in every single one of our relationships. And every time we have a positive interaction with somebody, think of it as a deposit. And every negative interaction with somebody is a withdrawal. So, for example, you meet your spouse in the morning, you say, "Hi, how are you?" That's a 5-cent deposit. You make them a cup of coffee, that's another 10-cent deposit. You smile warmly at them, that's another 50-cent deposit. You call them during the day, another deposit. You greet them warmly when they come back, another deposit. And the same goes for the opposite. If, for example, you meet somebody you don't like so much and you scowl at them, that's a withdrawal. You cross the street and not talk to them, that's another withdrawal. You turn around instead of greeting them, another one. You have a fight, that's a major withdrawal, right? And there's certain kinds of withdrawals that totally bankrupt the account. For example, breaking somebody's trust, that's a total bankrupt. If we think of every relationship as a bank account, we can also think of our relationship with God as a bank account. So every time we do a positive commandment, that's a deposit. And every time we abstain from doing something that God tells us in the Torah not to do, that's another deposit. Every time we do a mitzvah, every time we have a heartfelt prayer, every time we help another person, every time we have an informal conversation with God, every word of Torah that we learn, or every kindness that we show to another person, and even every thought of repentance, every time we think No, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to do better next time. All of these things are small deposits. So now, as we come to Passover, we can think of this time as a special time to make so many deposits into this bank account. Today, the 23rd day of Adar, starts a very special time. It's called the 72 Days of Mercy. And this time period, these 72 days are separated into 3 parts. From the 23rd day of Adar, which is today, until the first day of Passover, is the time when we have an opportunity to clean out everything that is not okay in our emotional being. We're not broken, we're whole. But in this wholeness, there are a lot of things that need to be fixed. We all have our bad character traits. We all have our pains. We all have things that need healing. And this is a particularly opportune moment to heal everything that needs healing, to fix everything that needs fixing. And as you clean your house for Passover, it's a special opportunity to clean out all the negative traits that you have, all the hurts, all the angers, all the disappointments. And as you do this, you can also think of yourself as making deposits into your bank account of your relationship with God. Because the only reason you're doing this, the physical cleaning and the spiritual healing, is really because God told you so. God gave us a commandment to get all the leavening, all the chametz out of our house. It's the only reason we're doing this overhaul, this spring cleaning of our houses. So every cabinet you clean, every pot you scrub, every shopping trip, every cooking day, every old cookie you throw out, these are all deposits into your banking account with God, into your emotional account with God, because the only reason you're doing that is because God told you so. And as you're doing all of these labors, as you introspect, and every piece of anger you throw out, every piece of bad will you throw out, every piece of disappointment you heal, all of those are also deposits into emotional account with God, because the only reason you're doing that is because God told you so. And let's face it, it's much easier to hold on to the hurt. It's much easier to hold on to the anger. It's much easier to hold on to the disappointment, because yes, they hurt us, but they give us so much benefit. They make us feel right. They make us feel the victim, and they make us feel like we don't need to take responsibility for our life because other people are accountable. So this is a very special time of about 3 weeks from today until the day before Passover, where we have an opportunity to clean out not only our houses, but our internal houses, our internal cabinets holding all the pains, all the fears, everything that we really need to get rid of. And then the day of Passover itself, that's the day of freedom. This is when God shows us that we can be free, that we can really attain freedom. And at the Passover Seder, the more we pray for things that are special, that we want to have in our life, the freedoms we want to have in our life, we can have them. And from there until the holiday of Shavuot are the 49 days when we count the Omer. And that's a very gradual, step-by-step growth process where we can reach our vision on the day of Shavuot, the day the Torah was given. So we're about to go into a very special time, the time where we can not only heal, but really reach new heights of awareness, new heights of character, new heights of relationship. And every single thing we do now, God has a matching plan. Every single deposit, God matches with a deposit of His own, making these little efforts so much more valuable and potent. This is why this time is so special. It's like God telling you, for every dollar you put into the account, I'm going to put in 100. So we have 72 days to maximize our emotional bank accounts with God, to maximize our own emotional relationship with ourselves and the people around us, to maximize our character, to become the people we want to become. It's the 72 days that are the most potent time during the entire year. It's a real treasure that is right in front of us, and I urge you to take full advantage of it, to invest as much time and as much effort as you can into this bank account and really maximize the deposit. I look forward to seeing you next week as we start the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra, with more news from the Torah. Until then, have an amazing week.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.